if you have any examples or case studies, or maybe a client, without mentioning who they are
Sure.
necessarily, but maybe an example of how you kind of help them either pivot or help them refocus in order to get through this
Yeah.
difficult time.
So we were doing a couple of events with customers. They were going to be exhibiting at booths. They had talks that were going to happen at events. So the activity that we were doing with them was to create messaging for the event itself. How were their services and software going to mix with the theme of that event? And we were doing outreach to the folks that were going to be going to the event, communicating to them all of those things. And, you know, pandemic happens, events shut down, no one's going to it. Their first inclination was to say, okay, well, so let's just see if we can do demos for everybody. And, maybe that would work in a different time, but since most of the prospects that were going there weren't necessarily just looking for demos, they were really trying to understand who this organization was. We pushed down the path of education, more information about their organization, kind of the value proposition of it, as well as the problems that they were solving, and then tailoring it to specific kind of pandemic-related activities. And not meaning pandemic, but times of crisis, times of change that are disrupting the supply chains, as well as changing kind of the way that folks are working. So change that to be more of a update of their service offerings and their software on their website, putting more case studies and more relevant information about how they've helped other organizations, and then disseminating that through social channels is what we started to do. And we've seen, still engagement with that, even though we kind of had to pivot pretty directly across the different channels that we had before. So I don't know if that's...
Yeah, I think that's actually a really cool example, because I think what you're touching on is this idea that even, pandemic or no pandemic, we're moving towards a place where it's less important what you do. It's less important what you do and more why you do it.
Yep.
Right? The whole why, what, how concept, where, there was a time where your fancy demo would be enough and you'd get that sale. Right. Yep. But now people are like, hey, guess what? You have tons of competition right now.
Yep.
And so just showing me a demo of your software is not enough. I want to know, who are the people behind this company? Who am I going to be dealing with on a regular basis? Right. If we do have this relationship. So I think some companies are kind of, turning a bad into a good, right? Where you're kind of learning that the relationships that you're going to build through these are going to be long lasting relationships. What you touched on before about education. Right now is maybe not the time to force the sale. Now is maybe a time to be of service and to provide value, and to make sure that you build those relationships so that when things do come back to some sort of new normal, you're in a position to not only foster that relationship, but grow that business together. Right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I couldn't agree more, Patrick. I think that's exactly right. I think that there's still a challenge, though, of salespeople having numbers to sell, right? Quota to hit. So we've seen a lot of start and stop of that. So I think in theory, educating, everyone wants to do that, right? And they even talk about themselves as being relationship-based companies, right? But when the pressure is on, do you stay that course? I think the other thing is that, sending out a note saying, we're here for you, right? Is that a relationship thing, or is that sound like a opportunistic gadfly that's trying to get into something that probably isn't the case, that they're going to really be able to be helpful?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and that's always going to be a part of marketing, right? Like, how genuine is your message?
Yep.
Do you really mean it, or are you just putting it out there because that's what everyone else is doing?